This is the Sony ICF-2001D shortwave receiver. It heralds from around about the late 1980s to early 1990s, and it was this device, or not this actual device, but one of these, that got me into shortwave listening, or SWL. And the whole idea of SWL was to try and track down distant, exotic, high frequency broadcast stations. There was also within the same band plan, you probably see here shipping, aircraft, all sorts of things. This actually had an airband version, so you would have had another button here which would have been for airband. And it was this device that got me into radio, because I'm also a licensed amateur radio operator, but I haven't been into amateur radio for many years now. I just, not so much lost interest, but, you know, life and everything, you just move on. And of course, things like the internet in particular, this was, you know, when I started off listening to SWL, there wasn't any internet, there was certainly no mobile phones or anything like that kicking about. And you know, technology's moved on, and interests, particularly amongst the young, have moved on, and this sort of thing is probably not so much of interest. But there's still a lot of SWL listeners around, and there's also software-defined radio, SDR listeners, where you get a little dongle like this. I might do a video on this at some point. This is the RTL SDR version 3. You plug it into a computer, and with a bit of software you can listen to radio stations all over the world. Well, you don't even need one of these, you can do it on the internet. I mean, what can't you do on the internet? But it's just not as interesting, is it? If you've got your own setup, your own external antenna, and through your own ingenuity and understanding, you're receiving these signals yourself, rather than relying on the ease of the internet. Just makes it a bit more interesting. So yeah, this is what got me into amateur radio, and I probably haven't done it for 20 years now, amateur radio, which is a bit of a shame. But the hobby was dying, certainly, when I kind of gave up. In those days, you had to have a license. I think you still do. You had to study for exams, which gave you a basic understanding of electronics, because the whole point of amateur radio was it was experimental. You build your own kit, and certainly, you know, back in the day, but not so much these days. I think a lot of people, particularly younger ones getting into amateur radio, will rather buy ready-built radios and just get on the airwaves. But it was a very professional hobby, you know, people were respected on the airwaves. It certainly wasn't citizens band radio, nothing like that at all. We're talking about, if you get the A-class license, which is what the UK had, they had two classes, A and B. The B class would allow you on the VHF and UHF frequencies, often 2 meters and 70 centimeters, they were called, so that's around 140 megahertz and 433 megahertz, and you would use something like this. This is a little handheld transceiver, which is absolutely amazing. This is from Baofeng, B-A-O-F-E-N-G. It's a Chinese firm. You can get these on Banggood, Wish, AliExpress, that sort of place. And this one cost about £30, probably less than that, thinking about it. And, you know, again, back in the day, something like this would have cost hundreds of pounds, and yet you can get this nice little radio for, you know, just a few pounds. It's absolutely amazing. I only discovered these in the last couple of years. I only bought the one because, you know, at that price you're not taking any risks, and it's interesting to hear if there's anything going on in the bands. I am licensed, I can transmit if I want to. But you can see this has been collecting dust because it doesn't really get used that much. But it is a cracking little radio. It really is. The front end on it isn't brilliant. You know, it's wide open. You know, it's not a top quality electronics, I don't think. But for what, you know, for the money you're paying for it, absolutely brilliant. So if you're interested in just having a play, having a listen around, you can't transmit unless you're licensed, but there's no harm in listening. So, something like that. This is the U5VR or something like that. Or is it? Oh, yeah, UV5R. Okay, so that's the one I bought. It was probably the cheapest one available, and it's still popular today. Very long established amateur radio operators, they use these. Yeah, they're not great. The top quality ones you would have got from Yaesu, ICOM, Kenwood, companies like that, and of course they make absolutely cracking radios, really solid, really stable, and so on and so forth. But just to get yourself started, this is absolutely fantastic. Anyway, so on the HF bands, yeah, you'd be listening around, and I bought this radio off of eBay, and I paid about £150 for it. And yeah, that sounds like a lot of money for an old bit of kit, but I can tell you now, these things can go between £200 and £300 quite happily. I wouldn't pay that, but for 150 quid, I gave it a go. Now, actually, when I got this one, it was a bit deaf. And what I mean by that, it wasn't very sensitive on receive. For example, I couldn't receive the UK's BBC World Service on it on 198 kilohertz. He couldn't hear it. He could barely hear it, at any rate. And yet, when I've got an old bench cheapy HF radio, which would hear it. This thing would hear it quite happily. Is that in that camera shot? Yeah, it is. So this would hear it quite happily, but this one wouldn't. So what I did is I searched around on the internet, and I found quite easily on eBay a guy in America who was selling replacement parts for this guy. Now, one of the problems with old electronics is particularly with the electrolytic capacitors. These sorts of things. Let me see if I can. Yeah, we played with these before, haven't we, on our Banggood kits? That's one of them there. And they go bad after a time, or they can go bad. Although I have to admit, in this radio, they were pretty good. In fact, what I did is I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. Let's try and refocus a bit there. I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors, and which was a bit of a job, and this is quite a sophisticated little radio to say. It was not even a little radio, it's bloody huge, but it's quite a sophisticated radio even by today's standards. It's computer controlled, it's got some ICs in there, memories. I mean, obviously very, very basic by today's standards, by a long mark. But it works quite well. I'm not going to bother. Well, I can switch it on for you if you like, and there you go. Now that's I don't know how. Let's have a look on the camera, see how well you can see that. But yeah, let's get a pointy thing. Let's just bring that down, and you can see here. This is part of the amateur radio band plan. You can see you've got USB, which is selected there, or you could have LSB, and that stands for upper sideband and lower sideband. So if you can imagine a signal's got a upper sideband and a lower sideband, amateurs can use one or the other, and what they tend to do is use the upper sideband for voice communications and the lower sideband, as we see here, for CW, and CW stands for continuous wave, more commonly understood by most people as Morse code. Now, back in the day, you had to study for your A license or your B license, and your B license will allow you, like I think I said before, to muck about on the HF bands, which is just basically local transmissions, or if you've got the A license, you could work on the HF bands, and then you'd be talking to people internationally all over the world if the propagation was right. And propagation means that if the signal is bouncing around the world strongly, so you can then get long distance contacts, and usually tend to find that it's better at night than during the day. That's when the propagation is not is better, because it's not so affected by the sun. There's also an 11-year sunspot cycle, which can improve or worsen communications, which amateur radio operators know a lot about. All these sorts of things. Now, this radio would work. Well, let's see what the. I was talking about upgrading capacitors in it, and I've got sidetracked them all over the place. What I did do with this radio is I stripped it all down, and I actually got another little radio here, which is the ICF-2001D, and this is a similar sort of thing. Obviously not quite as good, but it's a similar sort of thing. I've only just got this one. It's quite dirty and it needs a good clean up, which is what I did with this one. But I actually stripped this one apart, and what I did with these buttons here, you can see they're quite white compared to these. Does that show up on the camera? I think it does a bit. Yeah, so these look quite yellow with age, and these are quite white, and what I did is I retrobrighted these, and I might do a video because I intend to do the same with this one. You can see it's a lot dirtier. You can see all the crap and everything that's in the speaker. So this thing needs to be split apart, but this is quite sensitive. This isn't too bad at all. But perhaps we'll look at that another time. Let's try. So if I go on to wide, which is where you'd expect broadcast to be, and put in 198. So I put in 190. Let's try that again. 198. And can I hear? No, I've got a... No, it's not quite there, is it? Might have some interference going on here. I wonder if this radio is throwing it off. No. Oh, I can't seem to hear it now. Should have tried it before starting this video off. It's I got an external antenna here, which is just about 10 meters of oh yeah, of course this isn't going to work because this is about 10 meters. Yeah, about 10 meters of wire, which is all you need for, you know, basic HF listening. But you can probably hear. Oh, power supply came out. It's not a good idea. So, yeah, you can just about hear the BBC World Service there. Couldn't hear that at all on this radio when I first got it. So I replaced all the electrolytic capacitors. Didn't make any difference. But I also then replaced the front end transistors, and then it came back to life. So this is probably as good as new now in terms of its sensitivity. Yeah, it is worn with age, but you know, it's a great little radio. There was some other problems I had with the antenna, was a bit broken, so I had to do a bit of a job on that to try and repair the antenna. You can see there I've got a nut and a screw bolt there. You can just about see that. Which I then had to file down to fit in there, but it's still a bit on the loosey-goosey side, so I've still got more work to do on that. But so you know, it's simple things like that. I won't open this radio up. I might open this one up on a video. But this is a nice little radio. It's pretty well. I think the receive side on it is pretty good. It's absolutely filthy, so I've got to strip this down to bare bones and clean it all up. And this is, for me, this is just a bit of nostalgia. Oops, crack. It's got a little flap on the back, kickstand. The other thing I did with this is that when these radios first came out, they did have an LED backlight. And even when they were brand new, that LED backlight was so dim, horribly dim. And but that's the way LEDs were, I guess, in those days, unless they deliberately designed it to be so dim. I can't see any reason why they would. So I've upgraded that as well, and give you a demonstration of that. There you go. Nice bright LED. Doesn't stay on permanently, it goes off after a little while, but as you're mucking about with the radio, it will stay on and then eventually goes off, presumably to save battery, but I'm actually powering it off the mains. Couldn't find an original mains power supply for this, so I managed to find one on eBay, or no, it wasn't, it was Amazon for about a tenner. And it's only this type of connector, but it's center negative, positive on the outside. Never understood why that was. I mean, tradition is you'd have positive on the inside, negative on the outside, but not with Sony. Don't know why. It doesn't really matter. One of this actual thing has got you can actually convert it, so you just twist it round depending which way you want the polarity on the pins. So, and as I say, it was only about £10, and it works absolutely fine with this radio, no problems at all. And I can't get it back in now. Look at that. Ugh. Why wouldn't you go back in? So I'm looking at this through the camera, that's why. So yeah, it's absolutely brilliant little radio. Still worth looking into today. You can get modern radios by Texan, and I'm sure they're going to be a lot better than this in terms of technology. Whether they're as good as this on receive, I don't know. I would like to think it was, being this is 2021 and we're talking about a radio from the 1980s, which will cost less than I paid for this. But nostalgia got the better of me, and I wanted to get one of these again. So there you go. So that's my amateur radio and shortwave listening life. And I'd like to get back into the hobby, perhaps when I retire one day, if I can ever afford to do so. And I probably can't, because I keep on buying crap like this. But it will be, it's a great hobby to get into. So I'm hopefully that we got to a stage where the internet is so boring because it's day to day that younger people in particular will realise that amateur radio is actually a fabulous hobby. I'm a fine one to talk because I haven't been into the hobby for a long time. Family life and all the rest of it takes over and you can't necessarily afford to do it. But these days, if you can get radios like this for next to nothing, and these are nicely built. They're solid. They're rugged. As I say, the sensitivity in the receive front end isn't brilliant, but my word, for getting you going, you can't knock it. Absolutely can't knock it. Brilliant. So yes, that's the way that I started off my amateur radio life, and I did have some HF rigs, as they call it. The way it works is that you've got long wave is around about 150 kilohertz, which is around about where we are now. You then got medium wave, which would be around 1 megahertz. And then you would have various broadcast bands across all of these differently. They actually show the frequency in meters. So if we go to, say, 90 meters, that's 15 megahertz or 15,000 kilohertz. So you'd be able to listen to broadcast bands around that. I'd be pretty lucky to hear anything. Let's see if I get my antenna back in. I would point out that, no, that's the wrong one. Where's the damn antenna? There we go. There we have it. So, and the volume down. If do a search up for amateur radio on YouTube, there are some far better amateur radio operators out there. I'm basically what they call QRT, i.e. non-active. But there's loads of guys out there into amateur radio, and also just pure shortwave listening. If you're just interested to know what's out there, you can go on the internet and download a piece of software and scan all the frequency bands. But yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can listen to on what they call high frequency. So this goes up to 30 megahertz, for example. So that will be the shortwave bands. And then you've got FM, which we know is around 78 to 108 megahertz. And then you've got the VHF and UHF, so it's 150 megahertz, 400 megahertz. And that, UHF is ultra high frequency, which by today's standards is nothing when you consider the modern mobile phones, particularly 5G, are looking in the gigahertz band. So, but in the day, that's the way it was. Yeah, you can pick up shortwave radios for not a lot of money, particularly if you want to look at some old stuff like this Sony. This cost me about, what's this? This is the ICF-2001D, cracking little radio. I paid about 25 quid for this, and it works absolutely perfectly. Trick with these things, get yourself an external antenna, and sometimes that can be nothing more than a bit of electrical wire like I have here. It's just ordinary electrical wire, and I just used a phono socket just to be able to tap into the end pin there, and that works pretty well. How much does a bit of wire cost? Very little. You just need to put it out the window and wrap it around the garden or something, and try and keep it, don't leave it wrapped up. It needs to be long and ideally isolated, but it doesn't really matter. The whip antennas on these things are pretty are okay, certainly for some, the stronger broadcast bands, but generally speaking, a long wire antenna is better. In fact, I actually managed to get my hands on one of these. This is the Sony ICF-71 antenna, and basically what you would do with this is that you would clip that onto the top of your telescopic antenna, and then you'd roll out this really great long piece of wire. Same principle, and then you just, I think actually this should have come with a little like crocodile clip, so you could clip it onto anything really, as long as you're stretching out the cable to receive all of those HF signals and so on and so forth. So that's an option, but you don't need anything like this. You can just get yourself a bit of wire like I've shown you there, and you can get into shortwave listening with very little money to spend, to be honest, and it's an interesting hobby. But like I say, not so much these days. The broadcast bands in particular, why bother, with expensive, or when I say expensive to run shortwave radio stations that are running hundreds of kilowatts of power to get their signal out, which costs a fortune to run as far as electricity is concerned, when you've got the internet and you can whack it out all over the world for next to nothing. But there you go. That's a little bit about radio, my interest in radio, which has waned over the years, but recently I've started to get a bit more interested in it again. And there we go. That's my take on HF radio. Now this little software defined radio from RTL, again, if you just go on the internet, you'll find loads of people talking about these, and with a piece of software and a decent antenna, you can pick up all sorts of clever stuff. So there you go. It's just a standard USB-A, and this side is an SMA. Is it SMA? I think it's SMA antenna socket. And you can buy these with and without the antennas. They're only about 40 quid, I think, for just this, and about 65 quid for one of these with an external antenna to get you going. And this is on Amazon in the UK. So if you just search RTL-SDR into Amazon, you're bound to find one of these, I would think. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. Bit of a waffly video. Haven't actually shown you much in terms of the insides of this. I didn't really want to. I had to do major surgery on this. Major surgery. There was bits of it all over the place. I should have filmed it. Never thought of it. But it took me hours and hours and hours to replace all the capacitors. There was about 30 or 40 capacitors, and then a couple of front end transistors. And to be honest, if I just replaced the front end transistors, I think that would have been good enough. But there you go, you live and learn. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and I haven't bored you to death. I'm starting to bore myself now, so I expect you are. Anyway, hopefully you found that interesting, and interesting rather. And I have got some other bits and pieces, and of course some fabulous Banggood kits, of which there is one there. Ooh, what's that all about? Yes, it's the same. Look at that, capacitors, electrolytic capacitors. Right, okay, enough of that. So with that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll give you your life back. So until next time, cheers for now.